Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information.
Jess, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk about all types of things in this session, relationships, getting started. We're going to talk about like building a financial base. What to do if you can't afford a property is like a really big topic, particularly on the Australian Finance podcast, the Australian Property podcast that we run. But I'd like to start with you. Now, one of the things that I wanted to set the scene with was I've been dealing with a lot of great female financial advisors. It doesn't have to be females. There's a lot of males in this camp too. But I think you are in this boat because I see a lot of great financial advisors who then choose not to do financial advice anymore and do something else, which is probably a bit of a shame for the finance industry, if I'm being brutally honest. But I want to know a little bit more about you and your backstory. What led you to financial advice? And then we'll slowly make our way through to what you do now. I know that's a lot to cover, but feel free to take as much time as you like. Like, when did you catch the bug of finance? When was that interesting? What made you move into that as a profession? Like, so many things.
Sure. I don't know if you'd have told me when I was younger that I would end up doing what I'm doing. I think I would have laughed at you and not had any desire nor inclination to end up in finance, because to be really honest, I thought it was for boring, dare I say, conservative people. And I'm like, that's definitely not me. That doesn't resonate. I'm kind of this outgoing, outspoken person. However, I will say that I have always been someone who has had a particular interest in money. And so that doesn't necessarily surprise me that I ended up in finance. But frankly, like, I fell into finance. And so I had a really fortunate opportunity to start my career inside a bank. And then I worked there for 5 years. Which bank? I won't tell you. And then I moved over to an investment bank for 6 years. And then I did an M&A out of there into a really cool role for a global insurance company where, frankly, my job was to go and speak at conferences all over the world to teach financial advisors strategies. So I kind of had a really different foray into financial advice, which often is, more smaller, dare I say, like cottage style, local businesses. Not always, but that's what a lot of them are. Whereas I come from like a really big corporate background. And then I co-founded a financial advice business in 2017. So yeah, I'd always, like, when I left school, I think in high school, I had like 3 jobs. I left high school with, $9,000 in my bank account. Like, I was just someone who always liked money and liked saving my money, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But I certainly didn't think that I would end up in finance, let alone financial advice.
Did you have any influences in the early days, like parents, friends, books, mentors, like anything?
Around money?
Yeah.
Well, look, I think it's interesting because people are influencing you as a child with money, whether you realize it or not. Like, the research, as you probably know, is by like age 7 to 10, you have a lot of your money beliefs formed. And so absolutely, like, I had people influence me. I wouldn't say that they were formally influencing me, and I wouldn't say that they were positively influencing me, if I was being honest. I learned a lot around what it's like to not have money. I came from a pretty blue collar, tough, rough world, and I knew from a really young age that we were quote unquote poor and that money doesn't grow on trees and that you have to work really hard. And, these were things that were very much instilled in me, and it created a really scarcity, fear-based mindset, which took me a long time to A, recognize, and B, overcome. And, we are complex humans. And so while I would sit here and say that I'm heaps better, there are days that, I need to check myself. My mum became a widow at 25 when I was a tiny baby. And so, by 25, you haven't amassed a huge amount of life experience nor wealth. And so, yeah, like, I lived with my grandparents for a while when we were young, which I don't really remember, but my mum remarried and had my brothers. But, we grew up feeling the pinch. And so I think I learned a lot more about the life that I didn't want, more than formally, how to invest and how to grow your wealth.
Yeah, the School of Knox counterpoints and all that. Yeah, wow. That's really interesting. So that scarcity mindset, we'll talk a lot about this as the conversation rolls on, but I'm just curious, how did you know, like what was an example of where you had a scarcity mindset, and how did you recognize that that's what that was? Like a lot of people listening to this would probably in some way be similar to that or feel similar emotions, but don't actually recognize it in themselves. So do you have any off the top, I know I'm asking this just straight off the top of your head, but like any instances where you're like, oh, that's me doing that part of me, if that makes sense?
Yeah, totally. So I think there's two things for me. So there's like a fear component and there is a stalling component. And so the fear or like loss aversion, this worry that I'm going to lose my money because I spend it, or lose my money because I put it somewhere where I, have created a belief where it's out of my control, and that I, this quest for control. And then this other component is I'll just wait for the right insert great excuse I've given myself of the moment. I'll wait till I've got more time, I've got more information. So these are the things that I have personally identified as stallers for me of financial success. And so when I start behaving like that, my job is to go, hey, nah, this is not ideal. You need to move yourself forward. And so one of the very, I'm going to say funny, like little moments that just popped into my head when you asked me that question was I must have been, I don't know, let's say 18. And like I had a reasonable amount of money. I had a job in a bank. I lived at home. Like I was doing well. And I really wanted an electric blanket because sleep is very important to me. And there's nothing nicer when it's cold. This is nearly 20 years ago. And I'm standing at the shop and it was like $120. Yeah. Which sure, maybe was a lot of money then, but like it's for sleep. Like it's not something that I'm not going to use. Like I'm going to use it a lot. And I remember standing at this shop having this internal battle with myself, almost trying to like there were two different, voices on my shoulder. And one of them was like, Jess, like you love reading, you read like every day in bed for hours. You're going to get so much value from this. This is going to be amazing. It's not that much money. You're going to love this. And then the other one was like, why would you waste your money? This is really like reckless. Anyway, I bought it. And I remember having so much joy from it, thinking how insane that I had to really like justify why I am okay spending money on myself when I actually was quite okay spending money on other people. And so that was like why do I struggle when it's for me? When I don't struggle, I wouldn't have hesitated. If someone said to me, a good friend, oh, it's really what I want. Maybe I couldn't have afforded it by myself. I probably would have like started a group chat if we had them back then and be like, hey, we all need to put in for this thing. And so it was this huge recognition that I am allowed to spend on things that I value, that I know I'm going to use when it's for me, and stop this BS, like make sure it's budgeted for, and that it's not just crap that's just going to amass in your, cupboards and whatever. But yeah, it was this really poignant moment where I felt silly afterwards that I'd had such an internal battle. And then flash forward to last year, I had exactly the same thing, Owen. I needed gumboots. My gumboots had holes in them. I have a working breed dog. Gumboots don't work when they have holes in them. And I noticed the same thing happening. And I was like, she's back. But, that's played out in lots of different areas of my life in terms of like waiting and just, holding. And from an investing perspective, I really held myself back because I was, this fear and control component, which meant that I wasted heaps of time and heaps of money.
Yeah. That's I think a lot of people can relate to that. Do you still do financial advice now?
So I still have my financial advice license. So I'm still fully licensed, fully qualified, got to do all my professional development stuff. But I'm no longer writing one-on-one strategies. So I do one-off general advice 1 hour sessions for people, and I run online general advice community-based money programs.
Why did you decide to do that?
Because when I was giving one-on-one advice, I had a beautiful problem that used to really stress me out in my business, which was I had a really long wait list of people who wanted to work with me. And often they would wait weeks, sometimes months. And I turned about 50% of them away because they were not at a stage yet where, frankly, the fee to get advice made sense based on how much they had. And I would feel so ethically conflicted because I was like, I can't take you on as a client because I can't charge you what we have to be a profitable business. But simultaneously, you're sitting here telling me, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm so stressed. I'm so overwhelmed. I know I need help. I just don't know where else to go. And, my default was, I don't know, like go and read The Barefoot Investor or like get on ASIC's Money Smart website. And most of the time people would be like, I have. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know where to send you. And so I would lay awake at night and think like, I'm having the same educational-based conversations with all of my clients or members over and over again. What if I recorded these, and what if I made resources so I actually taught people how to fish, but they could come in for live community calls with me so they get that hybrid so they can clarify stuff or, bounce ideas off not just me, but a community more broadly. And I could charge them so much less so that I could help all of these people that, the irony that they didn't have enough money to learn about money. I was like, nah, this is rubbish. I need to do something about this. And so because that's, now my main focus, if you know how full advice works, it's long and it's, arduous. And we have so much, compliance and regulatory overlay that meant that I don't think you can do both well simultaneously.
Yeah, that's fair. And so you've got your website, which I'll shout out for people and put in the show notes, jessicabrady.com.au. You're also on Instagram, podcast, all those types of things. So there's a lot of ways that people can get in contact with you. And this kind of sets the scene for the next question I wanted to ask you, which is, just as a general rule, do you think, or general gist, do you think that financial literacy is improving, declining, same? Like, how do you think about the problem that a lot of people call out in the media or whatever?
Look, I think this cost of living crisis that everyone has been through has done one thing, and that is it's kind of made it a bit more socially acceptable to talk about money, because I feel like most people are feeling stressed and the pinch right now. And I hate that people are feeling stressed and the pinch right now, but I do love the idea that we are finally creating a world where it's not shameful to be like, hey, my mortgage has increased, or my God, my rent's gone up. I can't do this thing as much as I used to, or whatever. Look, there's counterbalancing arguments. In COVID, we saw such a rise of new investors, particularly female investors, which is obviously awesome and really encouraging. But then you look at the Hilda survey reviews, which said that, women's level of financial literacy is gone down and it's going backwards. And so, people always like to point to data sets. You could pick whichever data set you want and, create a story around it. I think more and more people are realizing, though, that the world that they live in is vastly different to perhaps the world they expected to live in. And so this idea that you can just mosey on by, have a job, and things will work themselves out, I think is no longer the way. And people are realizing, oh God, I'm actually stalling or going backwards. This is actually a core life skill and a capability gap. And I'm feeling stuck and I'm feeling like this is really hard. What am I going to do about it? And so people are now starting to be far more proactive and thinking, this is not how I want to feel forever. And if I actually want to do some of those things that, frankly, the generations before us kind of took for granted, this is going to take effort, and I've got to put in the hard work to get there.
I was actually, I was doing a podcast with Equity Mates yesterday. I know you know.
I do.
And during the middle of the podcast, my chickens outside were going nuts. And I said to the guy, do you want me to, I'm going to have to stop, do you want me to go do something about the chickens? No chickens were harmed in the filming of the podcast, by the way. But so they're like, oh, maybe if you can. And then I came back and started recording. And they were like, just the fact that you have enough room to have a chicken is like crazy, because they're from Sydney like you are. I'm from Melbourne, where the prices are slightly better. But there's like a really obvious example of like the state that people find themselves in, younger people in particular, is like the inability to afford a house. They might have any land. Like, it's just like, that's like totally up in the clouds. And I think that is really not appreciated by many people. Like, a lot of the Rask community, the older generation, parents, grandparents, are helping their kids, like, because they get it, they know.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's got to the point where that's like spiraled way out of control, and people don't appreciate those things. They have to make change. But at the same time, there's like podcasts, YouTube, social media, the internet, books, like so many good resources. The barriers for finding information have come way, way, way down, which is a wonderful thing. And I think that will help in the long term. But yeah, that's just how I think about it. It's like there's some competing, there's tension there. There's like out of touch but also more resources, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think, so it totally makes sense. And you're absolutely right. Like, the great news is it's never been easier to learn about money and to learn how to make wealth. You have to overlay that, though, with the macroeconomic environment being really bloody hard. However, I think the worst thing that we can do is look around and go, this is a nightmare, or this is really tricky, or I'm not capable, I don't know anything about it. Like, insert whatever awful money story you may have told yourself and then give up. Because that's what so many people do. They're like, well, this is hard. And hard is hard, but it's like, yeah, but choose your hard. Like, do you want to put in the hard work now and so you can get on track? Or do you want to just like pretend this isn't an issue and then look back and be like, shit, I'm in a financially precarious position, or like I never did those things. Like, that's much harder, in my humble opinion. Also, just on a side note, I seem to have gone down a very strange algorithm in that Facebook is currently giving me possibly every online chicken community to be part of. And so whilst I live right smack bam in the middle of Sydney, it is aspirationally on my to-do list, Owen, to one day have a place where I can have chickens.
Well, yeah, it's such a small thing, you know. It's the trimmings of life, but it's a thing. The next chunk of questions I've got for you are more around like getting started and helping people do this, because I know you do this like with your coaching and that sort of stuff that you do with people. And rather than kind of ask you really specific questions, I thought I'd maybe like give you a scenario and then something falls out of that. Like, I would imagine, say, like a 30-year-old, we'll start with the younger one, a 30-year-old starting fresh after a big life change, let's say kids, divorce, something like that. And, you know, they know that they should do something now, right? They need to do something now. So where do they start? You know, there's a lot of people that would be like you said, throwing their hands up way too hard. Where do they start?
Well, start wherever you are is my honest answer. I think it is always fascinating to me that typically when people would come to me for one-on-one advice, there was some catalyst. Something had happened. Either they'd found out they were pregnant, or they were trying, or they were having another one, or they're getting divorced, or they're getting married. Or someone's, family member got sick or has passed away. There was an inheritance situation. And so what we need to remember, because we love, I think, in the finance world, to pretend that money is very clinical and sort of in a petri dish and, spreadsheets and modeling, but actually money is deeply emotional and messy and complicated. And so when you throw in a situation that often has financial implications, but also a whole heap of emotional mess, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, that can be really hard. And so what I say to people is, if you can, ideally don't wait for this big life event to erupt on your doorstep, because from a statistical standpoint, particularly if it's very stressful, we know that your IQ drops by something like 13 points. And if you've ever been really stressed in life, you might look back on it and think it was a really foggy time and be like, oh God, I don't even really remember it. Or like, I made some really strange decisions that I can't reconcile. Yeah, because your brain isn't working properly. And so I think you need to decide whether you're in that really acute stressed phase. And if you are, I think it's okay to say, I'm in a fog. And whilst I don't want to delay, it might actually make sense for me to delay this just a tiny bit if I can, so that I can make the right decision. However, obviously to that point that you said before, like, we don't want people to just be like, still here, just delaying, because that can be very easy for us to do. But I think we have to recognize, like, there are really emotional things for people to process. So if you're in the acute phase, I'd say get impartial third-party advice on any bonkers ideas that you think you might, enact. I had a lady ring me. I will never forget it. I was getting a coffee in Hyde Park and I got a random call and she said, hi, we've never met before. I've left my husband this morning. How quickly can I come in so that we can get all of my stuff sorted? And I was like, did you say this morning? She's like, yes. And I was like, oh, okay. This is very new. I said, we can definitely have a chat, but like, we aren't going to she was like, I want to sell the house. I've called a real estate agent. And I was like, I think we just need to sort of cool the jets a bit. We obviously need to make sure that there's some safeguards in place from a financial perspective. But anyway, we had a meeting. And then a few months later, she said to me, I'm so glad and I'm so grateful that you didn't let me just fire off. She just wanted to sell it like that day. I think if someone had walked past her house and offered her $1, she would have just been like, yep, good, I'm done, I'm out. And she's like, I just went into this really clinical phase, an action mode phase. And I thought if I just get all these things done, She said, I hadn't even processed all the emotions. And she said, I would have potentially lost a lot of money. So there's that piece. But ultimately, if you're starting a big new chapter, whether it's for good reasons or bad reasons, I think we need to do a temperature check of like, what is the situation? Where are you at right now? What does this situation actually mean for you? And potentially other goals that you were working towards. Does it compete? Does it complement? And ultimately, like, what needs to change? What do you need to do? Get a hit list. Let's be, really practical and pragmatic about it. And then once you've got a bit of a hit list of all the things you need to do or learn about, then the question is like, well, how are you going to enact that? Because knowing about something and doing something about it, in my humble experience from personal lessons, they're different. And so you can spend hours like writing goals lists or writing to-do lists. But the ultimate question is like, when are you going to do this? And who is going to keep you in check? Because otherwise it's just going to live in your head forever and it's going to burn a hole in the back of your brain and it's going to feel so much harder and heavier than if you just crunched, sat and did. The level of relief that I get from when I've stalled on things and then do it. And then I'm like, why did I build this up to be so much bloody harder and ruminate on something that actually wasn't that difficult in the first place?
Do you think that's the benefit of having a financial plan? Like, what I mean by that, or any plan. So something written down is like, you said, like third-party advice. I think that like from the people that I deal with mostly investors and whatever, a lot of them don't have a plan. Like they've never seen a financial planner or even done one themselves. But it's clear that people that at least write something down, like this is why I'm investing, this is how I'm going to do it. Or even like the if-then scenario. So like if the stock market falls or if, interest rates go up, I'm going to do this, like or pick from one of these things. Like people that preempt that, in uncertainty, a plan gives you confidence, I feel like. Because then it gives you confidence to make the first step. Like, hey, 2 years ago, Jess said she would do this, so I'm going to do it even though it feels uncomfortable right now. And that's why I feel like a lot of the community that you build, but also being that kind of third party is like really, really powerful. I feel like that's where it might come from.
Totally. So like I do a 10-week sort of more structured, intensive, if you will, money program called the Greenhouse Money Growing Program. And in the investing component of that, I get them to write what is called a sleep at night plan, which is borrowed from The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, which I know that you know and like. And the idea is, we plan for when markets go down because it's not an if, it's a when. And so like, let's get that sort of game plan sorted so that we have a go-to strategy when markets go down. And then simultaneously, I have a different ongoing money community called the Evergreen Money Club. And every month I do what I call financial get shit done sessions. And they are live action and accountability workshops where people literally come with their financial admin and we sit as a collective for an hour once a month and we get it done. So I think that there's two different things here. It's like, let's have a plan for when things don't go to plan, but simultaneously, let's actually also carve out the time to do the work that it takes to move ourselves forward and to achieve that progress. And to your point around coaching, I hope what the listeners can hear is that like, I do not come from an ivory tower. Like, I think, it's really important that people in our world be radically transparent about the fact that like we too are humans and we've all made mistakes. And the more that we can be honest and vulnerable about that, I feel like the more solidarity it gives everyone. When I was first giving advice, I was way too nice to my clients. I let them get away with so much BS and I'd be like, there, it's okay. And what I learned as I got more confident in my own coaching style and through doing training and honestly thinking about like what works for me is that I realized as long as I could do it with grace and from a good place, the more I actually held people accountable to the things that they told me they wanted and to really hold space and silence for tough conversations, the more my clients valued me. And they really valued, it was kind of like this weird thing where I was like, the meaner I am, the more they love me. This is like some weird thing. But ultimately, that's what people want. People don't want you to say, yes, dear. People want you to be like, what the hell are you doing? And like, I don't care whether you achieve your goal or not. It's not my goal. But like, don't you want to achieve the goal? Let's figure this out. Where are you tripping yourself up? Why are you doing this? You're band-aiding with spending. We got to get into like underneath here so we can fix it? And yeah, there were often tissue boxes on the table, but they were really productive, healthy conversations to help people stay accountable, because I think we're all too polite. And we help our friends justify bad behavior with money, and I'm not about it.
Yeah, fair enough. That I mean, makes a lot of sense to me. Like, I think the traditional model of, like, the way we think about money, at least, is that vulnerability is weakness. I think that's what, like, a lot of older men particularly, like, exude. They're kind of like, don't talk about money, don't talk about emotions, because that's weak. You know, they're brought up in a post-war era by Vietnam vets and Second World War survivors and that sort of stuff. Very different to the current climate. And whereas nowadays, I feel like there's this growing chorus of people that are like, no, being open and being vulnerable allows you to identify blind spots, identify weaknesses, get feedback, and improve upon them, which makes you stronger. I'm curious, like, what are the kind of beliefs that you often find people in your community, or when you're giving advice? What are those beliefs that hold people back? Sure.
I think you're 100% right. Like, vulnerability is a strength. And that is a huge generational trauma that people have to unpick and unpack. The most common one, hands down, noting that I predominantly work with women, not always, and it's not by design, to be honest. It's just a lot of who comes and does my programs. It's probably like 70-30. The amount of people that I have heard over the years who have said to me, I'm no good with money. It's too risky. I don't understand it. Basically, they've created this belief system that they don't have the skill set or genetic makeup to, quote unquote, get money. And I'm like, listen here, this is not some sort of genetic chromosomal thing, my friend. This is something that, frankly, we should have learned about at school. But instead, we were off learning trigonometry, which has been so wildly helpful in real life for most of us. You're not an idiot. You just never learned anything about it. And so telling yourself you're bad with money perpetuates a behavioral side of things, which means that you're probably going to behave badly with money. And then you're self-confirming that belief system and concreting it in more. So I think there's a lot around a belief of capability. There is inaction is a really common one. Like, I just don't know where to start. I just get brave. I get learning. I get overwhelmed, and I get off the train again. And these are really common, but they are very unhealthy.
I realize this next question that I have for you is kind of like I'm just like walking past and just dropping something on the table in front of you. It just could be really provocative, but do you think goal setting actually works?
Ooh, little bomb that you're dropping there. I think goal action works. So I'm going to try to make sense of my own strange ramble there. For years, so I'm a very challenge-oriented person. Yeah, I do a lot of work around core values and aligning money stuff and goals to core values. And frankly, I find it really fascinating that we have no idea who we are or what's important to us. Like, we know what we might be going to eat for dinner over the next 7 days, or where we're going on holidays this year, but we don't actually know what drives us, which I think is an interesting thing for us societally to ponder. So challenge is one of my core North Stars. It's very important to me. So naturally, I lean into goals. I like goal setting. I like visualization stuff. I like how the RAS, I'm really fascinated by the brain. But for years, Owen, I worked in a very busy, I would say sort of high pressure-y job. And I thought, I earn good coin, I work hard, I get the thing. That was my sort of 1 + 1 = this. Now, if you've ever tried that strategy, you, like me, probably had the same outcome, which is, it doesn't exactly work. And I was getting myself frustrated because I'm like, what the hell is wrong? I know what I want to do. I'm working. It's not exactly translating to what I want. And then I realized I was missing quite a crucial component into this recipe, and that is the component where you actually do the thing. Yeah, I just kind of hoped that because I had such conviction in my goals, I don't know, that they would appear. And so about 7 years ago, maybe longer, I got a goals coach, which, to be honest, I'd held off because I was like, this sounds woo-woo and stupid and like hashtag inspo living your bestest life, which like I'm not that person. And actually it was very much, Jess, you're a challenge-oriented person. You like hard work, but you have no structure or process in attaining these goals. And I do now this weekly. This has become like ingrained in me, and I have fundamentally, radically transformed how I approach goals. And it's so easy. I literally have half an hour a week that I dedicate to doing the micro-tasking things that are quiet, that are unglamorous, that are seemingly insignificant. And the cumulative and compounding impact of doing that just for 30 minutes a week, every week, over 7 years has meant that I've knocked off so many big things in my life. And I'm like, good Lord, this is so scary because it's so easy and it's so attainable. And if you're like, I can't do that, open your phone and go into that horrible thing that tells you how much time you spend every day on your phone, and then tell me that you don't have 30 minutes a week. Send hate mail later. So I believe in goals. I believe in the science behind goals. I think that there's wonderful research that shows, yeah, if you have a goal, you're more likely to achieve it. But I think ultimately it's actually about how do you set yourself structurally up for success in a life that is fast-paced and where you can absolutely railroad yourself and give yourself wonderful excuses about why you can't insert the excuse and go around in circles for a long time.
So that kind of half an hour, it's actually interesting. Just thinking about that on the iPhone for folks. I'm sure there's an Android equivalent, but that you can do the whatever screen. I don't know what you call it. Screen time, yeah. And you can see what apps and stuff you use. It's just wild. That's when I realized I had to get off. It wasn't just that I realized that I had to get off Twitter or X or whatever it's called. That was also just like the negativity on X at the time. But that was when I realized that my life became so much better. I was like spending more time reading books and getting back to doing that sort of stuff, listening to podcasts. So I've got a much healthier screen time at the moment, Jess. But how do you, like, is that where people go wrong? It's like they set the goal, maybe they even write it down, but then they don't. Like, what stops them from getting that traction? What stops them?
Well, I think you're trying to eat an elephant. Like, eating an elephant's that's an overwhelming, big thought. And so you get into this analysis paralysis, you get into this quicksand and you're like, I'm stuck and I don't know where to start and I have no idea how to tackle this. And so, how do you eat an elephant? Well, you bite it. You just bite and just keep chewing and then bite and then just keep chewing. And so I think for me, what I try to, and like I have a framework that I teach people and I have a sort of methodology that I teach people, but, I say to people like, your brain feeds off progress. You need to prove to yourself that you can do the thing. And it is so satisfying to do the thing that actually it motivates you to do the next thing. And if you make those things so big and so hard, so it takes so long to do, you give up. So how do we find you the tiniest, most micro-taskiest thing? And we write them down and we chunk them into the apps, especially if you're just starting. Like, it seems silly. I don't care whether it's like, I will call this person or I will look into this thing or I will read this article, whatever. Make them wildly attainable. Write them so that when you tick them, your brain is like, hells yes, I did that. Hells yes, I did that. And that feeds literally your brain to keep moving. So I think we need to microtask. And the second component to that is, frankly, we need to acknowledge that the personal training industry by and large exists not because we don't know how to get fit, but because we need support in doing so. And we need people to sort of supervise us. Sometimes I honestly feel like a child, and I'm okay to admit that because I'm like, yeah, I get better results when I'm accountable to someone. I do. Now, you can be like laughing and scoffing and be like, well, I don't. Awesome. And like, please send help because I need to know how you do that. But I know that I'm not alone, which is why I built in sort of the accountability part of my community. When people have to show up, when people have to say, hey, I didn't get this thing done that I committed I'd do last month, people don't want to do that. People are like scrambling. I can see on my platform, most people are in there getting shit done, I don't know, like an hour before the call. And I don't care. That's awesome because I know if I didn't have the call, they probably wouldn't have done the thing.
Yeah, that's fine too. Progress, right? How do you keep track of these goals, or how do you goals? And like, do you use like a spreadsheet? Do you use like an app? Do you use some sort of tool to help you track? Like, obviously, as a financial planner, you would use different tools like Xplan or whatever those tools are, you know. But what about when you're dealing with individuals? Like, what kind of tools and resources could they use?
Yeah, I mean, you don't need any sort of financial planning software, and you wouldn't want to based on how it looks, trust me. I think do whatever works for you. And I don't think you need to make it overly complicated. I think you just need to find a structure that works for you. So what I use and what, from an ongoing accountability perspective, I use with my members is a Google Sheet. It's not like you can have all the apps in the whole wide world. You can spend all this money. You can have the most beautiful, like Anita from my team, she likes everything color coordinated and like really pretty and lovely. Awesome. Great. You don't need all of that though. All of the resources and tools that you need are inexpensive. It is about discipline and structure. And so, yeah, I use Google Sheets. We've created some fun things so that as people tick off their list, things grow so they can actually physically see the progress, which I quite like because I'm a visual person. If you, like, I'm an everyday write my list in a notepad, get shit done sort of style, because there is nothing more satisfying to my brain than just getting a pen. And I will write things on the list, Owen, that I've already done because I want to tick it off. Like, I'm that level of mental when it comes to this stuff. I think the worst thing you can do is spend a whole heap of money, time, effort building the most perfect way that you think you're going to do it. And then it becomes so hard or complicated or heavy in terms of time investment that it then just breaks because you don't use it.
Yeah. Some people, like you said, get satisfaction out of those things, and some people don't.
Right.
Yeah, I like the idea of chunking down like bigger goals into little goals. Eating an elephant one bite at a time. Love that. I also think that a lot of people use the personal training, the habit formation thing of like 6 weeks and try to get to 6 weeks and, you know, the habit is formed. But there's a lot of research that seems to be suggesting it's how it makes you feel, not how long you go. Like, how does it feel to tick that thing off your list? That's the thing that reinforces positive habits for some people, which is quite interesting.
And also, how does it feel when so one of the things that I look at, especially for medium and longer term goals, which most people really struggle to take action on today, is like, if you never did that thing, how does that feel? And whilst that fear drive is clearly not a nice place to stay in, there's a lot of really good research that shows that fear is the ultimate motivator. We as humans are much more likely to run from something we're scared of than, you know, run into something that might be good. And so it's like, well, let's use that hack to start, not to sustain, but to start. And so, like, how does it feel? How would it feel if you never achieved that thing? If you never got to take your kids on that holiday? If you never got to, I don't know, get out of that debt or buy that house or, I don't know, be able to take a sabbatical, whatever you want to do. How would it feel if you never got the opportunity to do that? Write it down. And then that generally is like such of an emotional response to be like, oh my God, I do not want that to be my life. And then we go into microtasking, which then does all of that positive reinforcement, which, yes, I have also seen the research that says that helps. But I find it really funny and fascinating that in the kind of goals inspo world, we're all talking about how great everything is. And it's like, actually, that doesn't help people start. Starting often is much more fear-based. And then we move into the inspo side of things.
Interesting. Very interesting. So the next section I wanted to talk to you about is more about like relationships and money. And I wanted to give you a hypothetical. Imagine you're going on a first money date with someone, but you've been seeing them for a while. You've seen them, say, 6 months. So they're not new to you, but this is the first time that you'll be going on a quote-unquote one of those money dates, right? So you never talked about money, but you would like to move in with each other, which is a big step that couples make, right? Fun one. Where are you going? So what restaurant do you go to, or what place or venue, or it doesn't even have to be anywhere. It could be the living room. And what are the questions that you're asking or the topics that you're putting on the table to discuss?
Oh, and thank you for throwing me this question. As a single person, I feel so wildly capable of answering all of this. First up, my honest answer is I'm not dating someone for 6 months and not talking about money. Like that's...
Yep.
That's not me, but I recognize it's a lot of people. So I'm going to play along. And also, I don't think I'm moving in with someone after 6 months, just saying. Although this cost of living crisis genuinely is pushing people to have these conversations earlier. I love living alone. I love my own space. I'm a secret introvert. So like there's nothing nicer than closing my front door, putting the latch on and being like, I am done with the world for the day. It's just you and me to the dog. But in all seriousness, I'm probably doing one of two things. I'm a very visual person. So I'm, whenever I'm thinking about any of this stuff, I've got a big thing of brown paper. So that's coming with wherever we're going. So therefore, it's probably not a restaurant by virtue of the logistics of it. I reckon it's probably a dining table. If we can go away and get some neutrality, that's probably a good thing as well. So I don't know, maybe it's a weekend away if that fits within a budget, etc. In terms of what we're talking about, I think it's a few things. So, again, coming back to that piece around values, like I really like to understand for clients and my friends, they've probably had enough of me asking, but I love to know like what's important to you? Like what really drives you? What makes you happy? And simultaneously, like what frustrates the hell out of you? Like where do you get stuck? What drives you mad? And simultaneously, I like to, have people explore that. I think it should be very much a two-way street in terms of these questions. And then I get really into like, what are you working towards? What are the big goals that are important to you? Why are they important to you? I like understanding like, what did you learn about money? How does that show up for you? Like, where are your blind spots? And I think if you're thinking about moving in with someone, frankly, I'm putting my investigative hat on because like, I want to know, where are you at? Am I inheriting like sexually transmitted debt? Potentially, if I'm in a situation where if I live with you for a certain period of time under the state and territory that I live in, I could be seen as a de facto. Are my assets on the line here? Like, I know it sounds awful, but we've got to be pragmatic and honest about it. If I come to a relationship with a lot of assets, I need to flag that with myself and with my partner and really recognize that, hey, if we need to put anything formal in place here, then you need to know that that is not because I hope that this is doomed. It's that we both need to agree that we are here for love. And that's why we're here. We're not here for assets. We're here for love. And simultaneously, if someone's in debt, I want to know why. How'd you get here? How long you been here? What's your plan? And how do we self-support so that, you don't end up in debt loops again, or we don't go on fancy dates. Like if 6 months in and then I found out my partner's in a lot of debt, I'd be like, dude, why have we been going to dinners? Why are we on this weekend away? We shouldn't have been. And maybe I'm not trying to get all Dave Ramsey on you. But I think that's important to understand. And then I'd want to know like, cool, I'm not a maid. I've no interest in being your maid, frankly. I'd love a maid. I have a cleaner. But like if we're going to move in together, like we need to have some house rules. What do you need? What do I need? Because this doesn't get talked about because we're uncomfortable about having the uncomfortable conversation. And like, unfortunately for a lot of women, they end up with a full-time job and a full list of domestic chores. Like, screw that. I work too hard to come home and I'm not doing your washing. I hate washing. So I think ultimately it needs to be really productive and insightful and ask good questions and just shut up and listen. Don't judge them. And make sure they ask you the same ones.
That's interesting, yeah. The questions that they ask, right?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't sort of talk about this stuff, and it's one of the biggest leaders of relationship breakdowns. It's like, well, clearly what we're doing is not working. So like, we've got to change this. I don't know. I've always had money conversations with my partners. I've always done these sort of sessions. Have wine, like make it fun. It doesn't need to be this like really boring, like get snacks, get music, get candles, do whatever you need to do. Like this is about building a life with someone, and how you start is probably how you're going to continue. So like have the chat, be brave, tell them that, what you're working towards, and ask for support. And if someone doesn't want to do that, or you can see someone is wildly misaligned to you, then thank God you haven't moved in with them yet.
Yeah, I heard something the other day, which is like you should be getting in relationships with people that would be good to break up with.
True.
Yeah, it's like kind of like maybe that's the end state. What's the end? Start with the end in mind. But I also think that like there's this kind of like this change in the way people think about money that's happening. It's slowly like making its way through. Is like couples, or would-be couples now, I should say, are more likely to be independent with money than traditionally, like where, like you mentioned, like you'd get into a relationship for love, not money or assets. I think in the past, like two people come together, shared bank accounts, shared spending, shared costs. But oftentimes that's not the case because one person is more dominant in their spending or doesn't have a healthy association with money or not interested in investing and growing wealth. The other one's maybe has a vice or something like this, And I think there's like a big change in the way that people are shifting to, we are a partnership, but we're also individuals within that partnership. Which is just another question I want to ask you, because in the lead up to this, I asked you about who is your community. And do you see there are any similarities, like well, there's obviously similarities, but maybe differences with like same-sex couples or people, who identify in a different way than, hetero, in your community, like how they deal with money?
Yeah. So I am a fierce ally of the LGBTIQ plus community, and I have worked with and continue to work with a lot of people within that community. For years, I anecdotally could see that there was some particularly interesting behaviors and stresses and markers of success, if you will. But I had no data to lean on to support it. So last year I went and did some research on a whole variety of things around, gender-based interpretations of money and stress and impacts of that. The data was split over generations as well. And I also asked people if they were part of the LGBTIQ plus community. And so the research was pretty alarming in that they were more likely to say that they were financially stressed. They were more likely to say that they were at risk of losing an asset or having to move out of where they're currently living with parents or with friends. They were more likely to have relationship conflict with money. And so, there was some pretty startling data points that came through that really confirmed a lot of the things that I was seeing. So,
I wouldn't have expected that, to be honest. Like, I'm pretty naive to these things, but I wouldn't have expected that.
And look, obviously, like anything, this doesn't resonate for everyone within one community, but, I live in what is quote unquote the gayborhood in Sydney. And a lot of my friends, I have family members in this community. And, I think what's important to remember is that for a lot of people within this community, there is a need for community and safety, simply safety. And so what that has meant is that often they flock into particular areas for community and safety. Now, in Sydney, at least, that is smack bam in the middle of Sydney, which is wildly expensive. But it also creates this bizarre, microclimate where, people, in my experience, and I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people in the LGBTIQ plus community, people tell me behind closed doors, they feel often quite a need to keep up. And there's this fear of judgment, which you can totally understand if you think about what they've had to go through to be able to fully come out and be themselves in life. And so, often that meant a lot of spending and a lot of getting in debt to try to keep up with the Joneses. And I'm like, no, stop. We have to get off this merry-go-round. And so, as I said, this is not for everyone, but yeah, there is absolutely now my research that shows that there are particular things that they are feeling that is different to the heteronormative community.
One more on this before we move into maybe a bit more of a situational question, which is obviously, financially fierce in many ways, right? One of the things that you talk about is obviously women taking action and all the things that come with money for women. One of the questions Kate wanted me to ask you was why now? Why is it so important for women that are listening to this to act now and start to think that way and approach it that way?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So on the Financially Fierce podcast that I host, I do talk about this a lot. I think the question is well, if not now, when? Because women's lives are if you look at statistically what a female will go through, they are likely to enter the workforce and have all of the challenges of trying to figure it all out, just like, men do, but they are more likely to be financially impacted when they have children. We know that the motherhood penalty wreaks havoc in terms of income within the first 5 years of someone having a baby. We also know that the cumulative impact of that is like $1 million less in income over their lifetime. And it's not even just the $1 million. It's like, think about the opportunity cost of that $1 million. And then considering that we live in a country where the new face of homelessness is women over the age of 55, that women are likely to retire with less superannuation than men because we earn less, and we are likely to take time out of the workforce. And remember, we earned that $1 million less in income, so we've not also got the income coming in from investing that money, and we live longer, so we have to make that less amount of money stretch further and further, over our lifetime. Like, this is scary. And these people who I've spoken to, who are older women, who are living on the poverty line, they had quote unquote normal lives. They had lives where they never ever expected this to be them, and they thought everything would just turn out okay. And instead they're living in a car or on a friend's couch or in a refuge if they can get a space there. And I'm just, and by the way, like, financial instability, inequality, and abuse, it's much more rife than you think. And it kind of pervades all income levels, all education levels. Like, we have in our mind, it is a particular type of person, and actually it's not. So I kind of feel like we must, because this, and, a lot of people, particularly women that I've worked with, they are far more likely to do something if it helps someone else. And so if I need to tap into that, I will. And I'm like, listen, if you can't figure out how to start for you, then that's okay. But what do you want for your kids? What do you need for them? What do you want for your grandkids? Like, it's never too, you're never too old. It's never too late. And what I find is that then the kind of mama bear, whether they have kids or not, kind of roars out of them, and they're like, let's do this. I'm like, yes, fine, great, let's go. And so obviously this is a message for everyone. Like, you just got to start. But I think we can't pretend, that these statistics don't exist. We may be really uncomfortable hearing them, and we might be able to throw back a whole heap. I've had someone say to me, but, my sister and I got the same level of pocket money at school. The wage gap doesn't exist. And I was like, I'm so glad to hear that you got the same pocket money. If only everything else that fell out of that would be so simple. But, like, we have to be honest. And so, yeah, I think particularly for women, not many of us have aspirations to live for decades in poverty. And what is it? Like, women over the age of 55, statistically speaking, they got 30 more years of life expectancy. What you do or do not do now is going to have a massive implication on the rest of your life.
Yeah, so don't wait till you need to do something about it. I was doing a presentation to Ladies Finance Club recently, actually, which was heaps of fun, and we'll talk. My topic was super. I got the last slot of the day and got the topic that no one else wanted. No, just kidding. Love the chat. And one of the things I talked about is, like, some of the data around this. And I'm like, take this for, like, can just solve from my perspective, but I'm like, yeah, I've seen all this data. I'm seeing all this, but I'm also seeing, like, if I take maybe not a half glass half full, but maybe like a quarter full, I see a lot of women that take a lot of really positive action now. Like, whereas, like, whether it's through like listening to people like yourself or watching people like yourself, or more female financial advisors, like all of this, more like female investors, we can see in some of the data, like, that, particularly in superannuation stuff, that women are getting more super, and it's great. Like, I'm trying to, like, constantly look for those opportunities and those things where I see progress being made. And I think that I think it comes back to what we talked about at the top of the show, which is, like, the information is there now, and I think women are far better at discerning good information. I think women are better at being long-term investors from the outset, rather than men who go into these, like, weird trading strategies and talking about, like, stupid crypto shit and all that sort of stuff. Like, I don't think I've ever had a lady talk to me about that. But, like, so women definitely are more discerning, tend to be better investors. That tends to come out in the data too. And so there are definitely some green shoots emerging, and that's amazing. And I think like you said, if you want to get started now, there are so many resources that are available to you. Good resources, good, honest resources. So seek them out, I guess. Like even following you on Instagram is a good place to start if you don't know where to start. Like really simple things that you can do right now.
Yeah. And I think we live in a world where we're so scared to celebrate success for fear of being shot down or, being ridiculed or, God forbid, tall poppy stuff. But we are humans and we connect with stories. And so, there is nothing more exciting than for me than every month being able to like do a roundup of our community member wins. And like some of them are like, this isn't a win, it's tiny. I'm like, no, you started investing this month. Like that is a massive win. We need to acknowledge that. Or like you paid off that credit card. Like this is awesome. And so I think our ability to celebrate and acknowledge our own successes and the people around us, which obviously means we need to talk about money, becomes those green shoots that we need. And when you start seeing people around you doing amazing things and you are brave enough to share them, obviously in a way that doesn't make you like an asshole, fair, you have no idea how good that makes other people feel. And it spurs something often inside of them, which is like, well, if they can, then like I can surely. And so I love being able to share stories, and like the amount of stories of people that I've worked with over the years who have come in feeling so broken and despondent and incapable and have morphed into these wildly capable, strategic people with their money, and like really owning it and like no longer having shame and being like, yeah, look, I'm not perfect, I don't get everything right, but like I'm doing it and I've started all these things. And it doesn't have to take a long time and you don't need a massive income. It's beautiful, Owen. We need more of it. We need all the stories. I love sharing them. I think it really helps people.
Absolutely. Kate always tells me that we should celebrate people who get their first dividend in exactly the same way that we celebrate, or people put that photo of themselves, like just bought a house, got a mortgage, we should do that for the dividends. We had one fellow who came up to us, who listened to the podcast for years, came up to us in Sydney, and he got his first dividend check. I'm sorry, mate, I think it's the wrong number, but it was like $4 or something. And he got Kate and I to sign it, and he was like, this is how excited I am by this dividend check. The ones you get in the mail.
Yeah.
So for a lot of people, they won't ever get the chance to, not ever get the chance, but they won't have the chance right now to buy their dream house or their forever home. We all think about that as like the Australian dream, golden retriever, picket fences, you name it. What options do people have if they don't have that opportunity right now?
Many. That is the exciting thing. Many options. And I feel that is very important to say, because as someone who lives in Sydney, you can just feel like throwing your hands up in the air and going, well, this is also friggin' hard and like you need to be a bazillionaire, so like why bother? And it's like, nah, owning a home that you live in is one way. It's just one way. And it's probably the way that you have thought you were going to go down, because frankly, that was often what was role modeled to us. There's some really, I feel like I'm talking a lot about research because I'm quite a nerd, if you haven't already figured this out, Owen. CoreLogic came out with some data in the beginning of the year, we're in 2024, that I thought, like I pondered some of the stats and I was like, this is interesting. What it showed was there is a bit of a difference in terms of underlying reasons around why men and women, they only looked at men and women, buy property. And so for women, it was much more likely to be based around that security, stability, not beholden to a landlord sort of component. And men were far more likely to say that they would go into property for growth purposes and investments. And so that really got me thinking about the fact that there are probably lots of women who are waiting on the sidelines to be able to buy, I don't know, insert picket fence fantasy here, who are constantly being sort of outpaced by a market that is ferocious if you want to live in the home that you own and you live in an area that has phenomenal growth. And similarly, men were more likely to say that they would buy a property with someone other than a partner than women were. So they were going into property ownership with, say, a sibling or a parent, more often than not a father than a mother, than women were. And so, I think there's sort of this sense of loss. Like people need to, if it's not going to happen for them, mourn it. have some sort of spiritual funeral for it if you need to, like mourn the loss of not being able to live in your own home either right now or forever if you don't think that that's going to happen. Feel it. It's real, because if you wanted it and you didn't get it, that feels awful. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Then it's about thinking, okay, cool. Do I buy in an area that gives me growth? Like, can I afford an investment property? Is that something that I'm prepared to do? And like, what are the financial implications and ramifications, especially if I live in a world where rental increases are really big as well? So making sure that there's enough buffer on the mortgage side, because I'm finding that most people are negatively geared, especially at the beginning. And so we want to make sure that you can bake in, the potential of additional interest rate rises, but simultaneously rent rises. Like, you don't want to get yourself in hot water. And you know what? If you're like, I couldn't think of anything worse than having a tenant, you don't have to buy property. You can also buy property through REITs. Like, there's different ways that you can invest your money. But then to counter my argument, just to make things wildly confusing, I then get a little bit worried, because I don't know how you feel, Owen. I'm also just really cognizant of the fact that we all need somewhere to live. And when you look at rental increases, if I'm honest, I do get worried about what happens when you're older and you don't have somewhere that's yours to live in. And remembering it could be a strategy, like a stepping stone strategy that might kind of get you there at some point. And I've worked with a lot of women in their sort of 40s and 50s who are starting again from divorce, and they have this sort of really burning desire for property, and they know it's not owner occupied. And so we often talk about rent vesting versus investing in other assets. And the resounding feedback is, at least I know I would have somewhere, if I went down that option, in the back of my mind. And I think that gave a lot of those women psychological safety. And then for me, it was around, okay, well, how do we make sure that we do this at a budget sort of level that means that that's not the only asset you have? We need extra money in the kitty so that we've got the ability for you to invest in other things, so that we don't have concentration risk and we don't put so much pressure on that one asset to do well, because what the hell are we going to do if it doesn't? Because banks will help you get yourself into a heap of debt and hot water, and don't potentially think that that's the only way to do it. So I think we can just take all of the societal expectations and throw them in the bin and realize that we can do whatever we want in our life within the sort of realms of capability and realism. And you get to decide. And there's so many different ways. I don't know. People find that overwhelming. I find that quite exciting and liberating.
Yeah, there are definitely different things you can do with your money, right? I think I want everyone to just sitting here watching or listening to this, to imagine like a world where home ownership wasn't an issue in Australia. Like, imagine for a second people didn't talk about it. Like on finance podcasts, we don't talk about being able to buy a home. Kind of like in America, they don't talk about that. Like they might talk about it a little bit, but not like we do. Like, imagine for a second, supply demand is not a thing. People can get an apartment if they don't have the budget for the dream house. Imagine that for a second, and how our society would be different. It would be a lot more at peace. And yet we kind of just accept that it's hard to get into a property, and that's okay because people get wealthy in property. It doesn't really seem to, like, as if I was like designing my Sim City of Australia, it wouldn't have housing out of touch for everyone, because you end up you either choose if you have that trade-off, it's almost like I'm going to be asset rich, cash flow poor. Mm-hmm. And then it gets kind of nasty where you get like those reverse mortgages, and where things might get it's not how you want it to go. So not to say that they're all bad, by the way, just in general gist, but I kind of agree in that you kind of got two roads, and neither of them are perfect. But I just wish it wasn't the case that we had to make that trade-off, and it wasn't just artificially going up because things go up, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think what we don't talk about enough is like, there is a massive storm brewing right now. And in the financial advice world, we are talking about it with sort of dollar signs in our eyes, being really radically transparent. Every time I go to conferences and we talk about the intergenerational wealth transfer,
yeah,
it is with bright lights and excitement. And I get it, because from a strategic perspective, it is really exciting, chunky work to be able to help transfer the wealth from the current generation, who, as you say, often are people who have had a lot of their wealth created and derived from property, to the next generation. But what gets missed in this whole conversation, in my mind, which is the storm that's brewing, is that we already are starting to see a huge wealth divide in Australia. And before, it used to be, I think, predicated a lot on your income and education level. And of course, there was some level of generational wealth, but it wasn't so bad. Now you can have really good education level, you can have pretty good income and still be on the wrong side of that wealth divide. And so if we're going to have, I don't know, however many $1 billion transferring hands in the coming decades, we have to be really honest about the fact that that is going to make that wealth divide so much bigger, because there are heaps of people who are not going to be getting anything from their family. In fact, they're going to be supporting their family. And the game just gets so much harder. And then you've got all these supply and demand issues, migration issues that, you know, we don't seem to have a plan to address the housing supply as is. And so like, I'm really, you asked me before about like, why now? I'm really worried that if people keep staying kind of safe and complacent and cruisy, they are going to end up in a really difficult environment to get ahead. And even if you think your parents are super wealthy and like it's in the bag, let me tell you, it doesn't always work out how you think it's going to.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. I've got one final question for you in a moment, which is, because we could talk about that like literally all day, and maybe we will in the future, but people can go to your website, they can go to your Instagram, and they can get in contact with you, DM you, say g'day, take one of your programs, listen to the podcast. There's so many ways that people can learn more from you, and I'm excited to share that. So if you are watching or listening, go and check Jess out online. There's so much you can do, so many services she offers. The question that I always ask everyone that comes on the Rask Network for the first time and does one of these types of interviews is, if you could go back and tell yourself just one thing about money, it could be finance, business, investing, it could be life, like just general, just like one thing that you would tell a younger Jess, what would it be?
Start scared.
Ooh.
Yeah. I don't know if that actually makes sense, but like, it is okay to be scared and just start anyway. I spent way too long and so much like mental, like, gymnastics, trying to like solve every potential risk or like trying to figure everything out. I spent 2 years with my co-founder of my first business trying to build a business, having never run one before we launched the business. And we laugh about it now because like we had no idea what we were doing. And if I could go back in time, I'd be like, Jess, just start. Like, you can have some idea, but like, stop waiting for all the answers. Stop wasting time, waiting for the perfect, I don't know, man, job, situation. Like, I know you're scared. I know this terrifies you because like so much in my life has terrified me, but I do it anyway. It's just taken so much time to recognize that feeling scared doesn't mean I need to run away. Actually, feeling scared is a good opportunity for me to be like, cool, I'm now seeing this as a signal that I'm ready for my next growth challenge, because this is scary for me. Like starting the podcast, we were talking about that before we went on air. Like I was so scared when they said, do you want a podcast? I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then it was like, no, Jess, anytime you feel like this is your reminder to just start. Stop waiting to feel like you got it all sorted. Just go. Yeah.
Perfection is often the enemy of progress. You get that confidence from doing. But I love that phrase, start scared. Jess, this has been heaps of fun. So thank you for taking the time to join me on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.